Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library for our How to Raise Children Who Love to Read program with Amber and Andy Ankowski, the authors of Bringing Up Book Monsters. My name is Miriam Mayer, and I am an adult services specialist with Gwinnett County Public Library. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. Tonight's program is a webinar, so you will only have a view of the speakers and you will be muted and your camera will be turned off. We will be doing a Q&A session at the end of their presentation. So if you have any questions, please make sure to type them into the Q&A box. If you have a comment, you can type that into the chat box. Now I would like to introduce our speakers. Amber and Andy Ankowski are known as the doctor and the dad. Together, they have found the best way to raise their 3 young kids by involving a healthy dose of child psychology, understanding, and an unwavering sense of humor. Amber Ankowski earned her PhD in developmental psychology from the University of California, Los Angeles, where she extensively studied children's language development. Her research has been published in academic journals, including Child Development Research Infant and Child Development and Journal of Experimental Psychology, Learning, Memory, and Cognition. She teaches psychology at UCLA. Andy Ankowski studied creative writing while obtaining his BA in English at the University of Notre Dame. He is currently an award-winning advertising copywriter and creative director who specializes in explaining complex products and services in simple and often laugh out loud funny ways. Amber and Andy currently reside in LA with their children. Please welcome Amber and Andy Ankowski.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you. All right. We can't see any of your faces, but it would be great to see them if we could. But it's nice to be here. Thank you to Miriam and the Gwinnett County Public Library. So we have a little presentation for you, and it is about how to raise children who love to read. So Miriam already introduced us, told you guys a little bit about us. So very briefly, a little bit more, Amber, she's the professor and the research specialist. She's got all the great information about child development research. I try to make it as easy to understand for just normal people like all of us as possible. I might throw in a fart joke here or there. Those are kind of my specialties. Also, if you happen to notice our actual live picture here in this Zoom, I have been taking full advantage of the, sort of pandemic stay-at-home kind of opportunity we've had over the last year and a half, and I haven't really been doing much shaving. But because this picture, what I did to it kind of grosses Amber out, I'm going to skip ahead away from that.
Okay, so we have 3 kids. We have a girl who's 11, a boy who's 8, and another girl who is 6. And they give us endless information and anecdotes that we use to talk about and write about.
Yeah, and we've written 3 books. Think Like a Baby is one that is full of experiments based on real child development research that you can perform on your own kids at your own home. From basically before they're born all the way to ages 7 and up. Goodnight Zoom is a fun little pandemic parody that we just wrote. And then, of course, the book that we're talking about today is Bringing Up Book Monsters, the joyful way to turn your child into a fearless, ravenous reader. And I think all 3 of our kids are pretty fearless, ravenous readers as well. And they do love reading.
Absolutely.
And so that's really what we're talking to you guys about today. How do you make sure that your kids are going to love reading just as much as you probably do, or maybe even more than you do. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, pretty much everything, is in our new book, Bringing Up Book Monsters, which you can surely check out at your library or get your own copy whenever you want. So how do we do it? How do we raise these readers who love reading?
Well, there's one major key that it goes throughout our entire book, and it will go throughout our entire talk here too, which is that you should never let it feel like a boring lesson. So, I
mean, she says that, and we get that you're seeing this chart that clearly looks like a boring lesson.
I was just thinking that. But just really quickly, this is research demonstrating that truly the key is to bring enjoyment to your everyday reading experiences. So what researchers did here is they observed families and grouped them into groups. Some families were high in teaching, so they did a lot of formal instruction of reading basics and things like that. Other families were high in reading for enjoyment. So they had combinations of families who were low and high in each of these. And the takeaway here is that if you look at the emergent literacy, the grade 1, the top 2 lines there are not surprisingly the groups with the high teaching. So those kids were getting a lot of basic skills in these sort of formal lessons. But look over to grade 3. Those kids who are the highest there are the kids who have families who read for enjoyment a lot. So really the key to long-lasting literacy is building a love of reading. And the key to doing that is just making wonderful, lovable reading memories. So people who love to read now, so if you love to read, you can probably really relate to this. They have fond memories of reading with their families, of sharing books with siblings and friends, of going to the library and checking out stacks of books and reading on your own on warm summer days. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, these loving reading memories.
And that's really what we talk about in the book. That's the whole idea of what a book monster is. And our idea is that it's not for just certain kids. It's not just that our kids love reading. Really, any kid can do this, because we believe that inside every child is a sentence swallowing, chapter chewing, insatiably ravenous reader. And all you need to do is figure out how to lure that book monster out. So how do you do that? Well, if you were trying to lure out a duck, you would use a duck call. There's a little long, but I love it. I could play it again for you if you want, but I won't. So if you were doing that with a duck, you need a duck call, right? If you are trying to hunt deer, you are going to douse yourself in deer urine, which I know we're on Zoom, so you can't really tell, but one of us decided to do that for today's talk. So we're not going to say which one, but you're welcome. But we're not trying to get ducks. We're not trying to get deer. We're trying to get book monsters. So what is the best way to lure out your child's inner book monster?
That is with your voice. So really, raising a book monster or a child who loves to read actually starts before you even open up a book. It starts with your conversations. And the more that you talk, the larger your child's vocabulary will become. So you might think, oh yeah, but my child's really little, they don't talk much. Well, it's true that babies don't say their first word until on average about 12 months old, but they can understand up to hundreds of words before that. And the more you say, the more they'll understand. And that's really important, because when kids learn to read, their ability to learn to read actually relies on much that they've learned through conversation. So vocabulary, for example, the larger your child's vocabulary is when they start learning to read, the easier it will be to learn. And that's because they'll know so many words that they will more readily recognize words as they see them in books. And then as they start reading, they will accumulate even more vocabulary skills, making further reading easier and on into eternity. So a really important thing to do outside of book reading, and actually all the time, is to add more language to your everyday activities. So the basics of conversation, embrace the idea that your kid is a really great conversation partner and that you should really take every opportunity to talk when you're doing things together, when you're out and about running errands, anytime. And so talk a lot yourself, and also remember to be really responsive when your child talks as well.
Another thing that you want to do, an easy way to just add language to everyday activities, is to notice printed words in your environment. Obviously we're going to get to books, but before you're even worrying about books, there are words everywhere that you can point out to your kids, talk about them, and get them to start realizing that, words are really key, and they provide lots of cool information that once they know how to read them, they're going to be privy to all of that. So, street signs. Oh, we can see this. This is the name of the street that the park's on. We know we're getting close, or, you've got a billboard advertising some great new toy, right? They're going to be interested in that. Or even you go to like a public restroom and you've got some graffiti on the stalls. Maybe that's one that you want to really sort of shield their eyes from. But the point is there's print everywhere. And by getting your kids to notice it, you're going to get them really interested in reading.
A really fun way to vary up your conversations and to help kids build skills is through language games. So our book has so many language games in it, but a simple, accessible example might be, I spy, where you say, I spy with my little eyes something blue. Maybe substitute instead by saying, I spy with my little eyes something that starts with B. And now we're using this, letters and words to play this game. But we have lots of other examples that we can talk about if there's time.
And then that brings us really to the big one, right? Reading books. Obviously, we're at a library event. You guys are interested in books. That's what this is all about. We want kids to love reading. And so when you start reading with your kids, what do? And the big key is to turn book reading into a conversation.
Yeah, instead of thinking of reading to your kids, try to think of it as reading with your kids. And really, what's more important than actually finishing the book is having a really great interaction over the book. Just think of the book as sort of a springboard for conversation.
So here are some ways that you can start doing that, some real things to think about as you're reading. So one thing you can do is explain stuff, right? So as you're reading books, you know a whole lot of stuff, and a lot more of the stuff than your young child does. So you're going to run into things like vocabulary words that your kid might not know. So when that happens, if you're reading along and, hey, there's a word that you think maybe my kid doesn't know about yet, ask them to say, hey, do you know what this means? They might surprise you and actually already know what it is. And if in that case, you can say, oh, that's awesome. You're exactly right. Good job. If they don't know, then here's an opportunity for you to help them get more out of the book by explaining what this word means. Talk about it, talk about some synonyms, whatever you want to do. That's a great thing to explain.
Another thing that's important to do is talk about the feelings and motivations of the characters. You might not have noticed this, but if you only read the text of children's books, there's actually a lot that you might be missing out on in terms of the story, or that your child might not pick up on like you do. For example, I don't know if any of you have read the book Noisy Nora by Rosemary Wells. It's a cute little children's book about a family of mice. And the gist is, it starts out where dad is reading with the older sister, Kate, mom is feeding the baby, and middle child, Nora, is making a bunch of noise. And then dad's playing chess with Kate, mom is bathing the baby, and Nora's making a bunch of noise. So as adults, you probably have already guessed why Nora is making a bunch of noise. She wants attention, right? But absolutely nowhere in the book does it say that. And so your kid this might go over your child's head completely, and they might really miss the point of the story. So just talk about it as you go along.
Another thing you do is make predictions, right? Oh, this squirrel character can't find his nut. Do you think he's going to find his nut? I mean, probably he will. I mean, it's a children's book. But anyway, it's fun to talk about. Make whatever kind of predictions you want. See what your kid thinks is going to happen. And then you get to keep reading and find out if you're right.
Another thing you can do is relate to it. So by this, we mean relate your real life experiences to it. So if you're reading about somebody's baking cupcakes, you can talk about, oh, remember the last time we baked? Wasn't that fun? Should we bake again? What should we make? The more that you relate it to the child's everyday experiences, the more easily they can understand it, and the more they'll get out of the book, and also just learn new stuff.
And as you're relating books to your life, one of the things that might come up is stuff about your family values, things that you believe are good or bad, behavior you want to reinforce or say maybe isn't so good. So a lot of books, might end in a very positive way where all the characters are making up and being friends. But a lot of times there's some drama before that where maybe characters are doing something that isn't so good. So if something big happens in a book, you can be like, oh my gosh, can you believe that character just hit that other character? That's not okay, is it? Hitting's not okay. And then you just basically can use it to reinforce what your family believes.
And finally, review it. So after you're done reading the story, just take the opportunity for more conversation to talk about, what did you think of the book? What were your favorite parts? And again, just use it to further your conversations with your kiddos.
And the last one, again, we're gonna say this a bunch of times, but have fun. So all of these things that you're doing, don't feel like you have to do all of these different tips every time you read a book. It's more just like, oh, if something comes up and you think of it, great, throw it in there. But only do it as long as you guys are having fun with it. If your kid's enjoying what's going on, keep going. If it's not so fun right now and you just want to get through the book and read it, do that. Whatever is going to be the most fun, it's exactly how you want to approach it.
Yeah, you might wonder, how much talking should I do versus how much reading? And really, it just comes down to gauging it by fun. If you're having fun reading, keep on reading. If you want to pause and talk, and vice versa. Just keep it fun.
So we're talking about things that we love, right? We want kids to love books, but one of the other things that we know are very easy for them to love are screens, right? So we've got all of these attractive, addictive, all engrossing screens that are competing for your kids' attention. So what are we supposed to do about that? And it's actually pretty similar to the way we said to just now said to read books with your kids.
Yes, by this time, it might not be surprising that our suggestion is to add interaction. You know that kids get more out of talking with you than they get from absolutely anything else. So you can help them get more from screens by adding interaction.
So different things you can do.
One is to choose responsive content. So if you think about the sort of spectrum of screens, some are much more responsive to your child than others. So for example, a FaceTime or Zoom or Skype, something where you actually have somebody on the other end responding to your child's words and actions, is far more interactive than like the very passive TV screen that's going to keep doing whatever it's doing no matter what your child says and does.
Yeah, so like if Dora the Explorer says, "Can you say abuela?" Good job. She's going to say good job whether or not your kid actually said abuela.
Yes, but you could have an actual video chat with your child's grandparent, and that grandparent will actually respond to your child. So you can sort of think about technology that way. Think about all the different types of screens your child might use and which ones they might get the most out of.
Another thing you can do is consume media together, right? Use the screens with your child. And in doing that, it allows you to do all these great things that you can do when you're reading a book with them too, right? So instead of just sitting there staring at the screen, you can see what's going on and then talk about it. Oh, hey, what did you think of that? What do you think that character's feeling? That kind of thing. So then if you just make them think about it more and discuss what's going on, they're going to get a lot more out of it.
And our very favorite tip for screens is actually to combine them with books. So one thing that our family has just loved doing is reading books that they've made movies about and then watching the movie together.
And so there's a whole bunch of those.
The BFG,
Captain Underpants,
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
And, there's like one or two Harry Potter movies out there that are pretty good too.
Okay, so getting back to books. So one thing that we want to definitely communicate is the importance of having books in your home. So here's another slightly boring graph.
Super exciting stuff. Just delve into this one, guys.
But the gist here is that researchers have done studies across the globe in many different countries, and they've simply compared going into someone's house and counting how many books do you have with a child's reading scores. And they've found that the more books you have, up until about 100 or so you want to shoot for about at least 100 or so, kids have higher reading scores. So that means that it's really important to have books around the house. And importantly, I didn't say children's books. So it wasn't that the researchers just went in and counted the children's books. In fact, we think it's really important to have a diversity of books that are used by the whole family, because you really want to avoid the impression that books are for babies and that eventually they'll grow out of them and into whatever it is that they see adults doing.
So these books, right? You want to have 100 books in your house. Doesn't matter what kind, whatever. And it also doesn't matter whether you own all of these books or whether you're just stocking up your house with books from the library. So that's pretty great. As long as you got all these books around, your kids are going to be benefiting from it. So, obviously we're at a library talk. We love the library. Our family digs it. We go all the time. So we just thought we'd share some of our favorite tips for making the most out of your library visits.
One is let your kids take the lead. So in other words, let them freely explore all the kids sections of the library and let them pick out what they're really drawn to. So we're not fans of sort of like arbitrary age limits or restrictions on the types of things that kids can read. But we do have favorite books as well. Or sometimes you think, oh, my child will really learn something great from this. So you can make your own picks as well. But generally, you want to let your kids take the lead.
Another great thing to do is use the catalog search engine at the library, right? So it's a really cool thing because you can say, hey, what kind of book do you want? and your kid can name anything, like, oh, I want books about pigs. You're like, okay, great. Let's type in pigs and see what comes up. Now, all of a sudden, you've got something that was in your kid's head. You've typed it in, you see a bunch of results on the screen, and then you say, oh, let's go to this aisle and we're going to go find it. And all of a sudden, we've got a book about pigs in real life. How amazing is that? Plus, it's, a screen. So, your kids are going to like that too.
Another tip is to ask your librarian for help. So this might seem like an obvious one, but we have really been impressed with the help that we've gotten at the library. Like, for instance, when it's been time to potty train any of our kids, the first thing we do is we go to the library and we say, hi, can you please help me find all of your potty books and videos? And pretty soon we have a stack like this, So, and if your child's interested in anything in particular, our daughter was interested in doctors for a really long time. And we thought we had checked out every kid's book on doctors that existed. But then we asked our librarian, and guess what? She brought us some more.
Another thing to do, make sure you get a library card for your kid. Let them get their own card. That is super cool. You're a little kid, you don't have that much power really, but now all of a sudden you've got this card that allows you to get whatever books you want, every time you go to the library. That's amazing. And that's just associating reading and books with this really positive feeling. So why not do it? Plus, when they do really become full, blossoming into the book monster status, they're going to want to get a lot of books. So if you've got a card and your kid has a card, all of a sudden you can check out more books than you could with just one account.
And finally, keep trying. This might sound strange, like what hurdles might you come upon going to the library? But actually, our family has faced a few challenges. So one has been our son, our middle book monster. We took him to story time a few times and he was really resistant about going back. He'd never wanted to go. And we're like, okay, I guess story time just isn't his thing. But then sometime later, he was asked to go on a play date to a library story time at a different branch, different librarian. And guess what? He loved it. He got hooked on story time from then on. It just turned out that he didn't love that particular branch's story time. So we just had to keep trying.
Another example of this, and maybe we shouldn't be telling you this, but this is a story about the time that we got banned from our library. Basically, when you're reading books with kids, you're going to run into some torn pages, whether it was their fault or somebody else, it doesn't really matter, but you're going to run into torn pages. And so, of course, we've been reading with our kids so much since birth. They've seen us repairing books a lot with get out the tape, get that torn page all fixed up, good as new, we're ready to keep reading. So one day, our 4-year-old, it was when our oldest was like 4, she got a book from the library and it had a torn page. This was not her, I'm not throwing her under the bus. But she found, oh, there's a torn page in this library book, I'm going to fix it. So she did. And then we returned the book without us ever realizing she had fixed this book. So then you went there.
Yeah, we only became aware of this because the next time we went to the library and tried to check out books, they said that we couldn't because our accounts had been disabled for vandalism.
It turns out that in addition to it being a 4-year-old trying to fix the thing, so it wasn't it was kind of a sloppy job to begin with, she also managed to do it with double-sided tape. So that just made a big mess.
Yeah, so if you come upon any hurdles regarding the library or just reading generally, don't worry about it. It happens to everybody. You'll have your own trials and errors, and you guys will figure it out together.
So then really the last thing that we want to talk to you about today is now it's time to select some books. You know, what books do you want to give your child to make sure that they grow up to be healthy and ravenous readers, right? You want them to be the best book monsters they can be. What's the best diet for a book monster? And that's why we developed the Bringing Up Book Monsters book pyramid. It's kind of like the old food pyramids, but this is all about what kinds of books do you want to give your kids?
Yeah, and you'll want to make sure that you sample from all the different categories because there's such great things that kids can get out of each one.
So here's some examples. So let's go through the pyramid. At the very top, we have
literacy skill building. So actually, when your child becomes a reader, I already talked about how having a big vocabulary was important. The other thing that's really important is awareness of the sounds of language. So understanding that words that start with the same sound, turtle, tea, tree, have something in common. They have that first sound in common. Understanding rhymes and that those sounds are in common. So books that play with sounds and that build vocabulary are really important. So we picked just a couple of examples. Any Dr. Seuss book, it just happens to be that Green Eggs and Ham is one of our family's favorites. And the Fancy Nancy series, because Nancy doesn't just wear fancy dresses, she also loves fancy words and explains them. So that's a really good example of a vocabulary building book.
So you've got some basic skills for literacy growing with this piece of the pyramid. And then another piece would be books that are just for fun, right? Because remember, that's like, again, the key. If you want kids not only to know how to read, but to love reading, let's make it as fun as possible. And there's lots of books that can do that. So there are joke books out there, right? Kids love jokes. Now they can realize, oh, I can find a bunch of jokes all at once in a book. So laugh out loud animal jokes for kids is one example, but there are tons. Another one could be comics. Our middle book monster got totally hooked on Garfield books, and he would just get those from the library all the time. And he particularly loved, this is kind of fun with comics, is you can talk about the difference between speech bubbles with the pointed arrow and the solid line, and thought bubbles with that look more like the cloud and the dots. Because all the humans in Garfield speak with speech bubbles, but Garfield can't talk, so he thinks with thought bubbles. And then a third category of just fun books are self-reflective books. These are like books that kind of know that they're books and they talk about it. And that's often really funny and entertaining. And it just sort of celebrates the idea of books. So More Bears is a great example of one that we've really loved in our family. And it's all about an author writing a book with absolutely no bears in it. Until, of course, the kids in the book and the kids you're reading to start yelling out, "More bears."
The next category is those that teach specific lessons. So some things that we put in this category were STEM books and historical books. So those could be any books that teach STEM lessons, science, technology, engineering, math, or historical lessons. Some of them are really embedded in stories. So, for example, the Zoe and Sassafras series is a really great series about this little girl who plays with magical creatures and has adventures. But the whole time, she's actually conducting experiments and using the scientific method, which is pretty cool. Flush the Scoop on Poop Throughout the Ages is also a fun favorite. It's actually poetry with historical facts about it. And also fact-based books are those that give you the straight facts. Books like Weird But True Books by National Geographic Kids are loaded with really fun facts that our kids, for one, love to spew at all different times of the day.
Constantly.
And finally, activity books, those that kids can really engage with, either by like filling in the blanks or by doing some activity prompted by this book.
Moving down the pyramid, we now get to storybooks. And these are probably the first ones that you think about when you think about reading books with your kids. This is one of the biggest sections in the book pyramid for exactly that reason. You're going to read lots and lots of storybooks. But what's interesting to think about is that there are different types of storybooks that you can be making sure that you're sampling and giving to your kids and seeing what they really react to. So there are storybooks that are text driven, that have a lot of text and maybe just a few images here and there. And on the other hand, there are illustration driven books that are maybe really heavy on the pictures, but have fewer words, or the words take a back seat a little bit. So one example for that is Miss Sadie McGee, Who Lived in a Tree. Beautifully illustrated book, really interesting pictures. And there are a bunch of words too, but the pictures really are steal the show. And they've got fold out flaps and all sorts of fun things as you explore this big tree house. You can also do books about major life events. Like we talked about earlier, every time our kid got potty trained, we loaded up on these. But you can also do them for, hey, a new baby is coming into the family, or even, more serious things like a death of somebody, a family member, or a divorce, or things like that. And then the last one is extended read alouds. And that's really where you're getting into longer books, chapter books, things that maybe have no pictures at all. And you might think that your young kids are too young for it, but we'd say, go ahead and try it. You will be surprised at how much your kids can keep up and work with you, especially when you're making reading with them a conversation.
Finally, our last and largest category is for unique interests. And that just means whatever your child is interested in. And like it says here, that could be literally anything and everything, as long as your book monster finds it interesting.
So if your kid is interested in it, tell them, yes, you can read that book. Let's do it. Because we want them to love doing this thing. And so if you let them get whatever book they want about whatever they love, that's going to be great.
And when you're raising kids who love reading, it's not just the love of reading that they get out of it, but there's so many ways that it enhances their life overall. Academic achievement, of course, starting pretty soon in elementary school, kids have to use reading to learn all of their subjects. It's going to give your kids self-esteem. It's going to teach them social and emotional skills. Every time they open up a book, they connect with or even really become a different person. And so it really teaches them about empathizing with others. It will grow their imaginations and what they realize is possible in life. It will teach them about relationship satisfaction. You're using this as a bonding experience. We've been talking about talking with each other and bonding with each other. And that's what really this is all about, which creates a great relationship for you and foundation for future relationships. And all of this adds up to really just life success.
And who wouldn't love that for their kids? So that is basically what we're here to talk to you about. Thank you so much. And you can learn more at our website, doctoranddad.com.
Should we turn that off?
All right. Well, thank you, Amber and Andy, for that wonderful presentation. I think it was kind of like an overview of the book. So I definitely recommend for parents to get the book, and there's a lot more stuff in there that would be useful. But I think we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. But before that, I'll ask a question that I have. So I'm a new mom to a 15-month-old, and I'm trying to get her into reading. Of course, we do read our books before bedtime or throughout the day, but she is one rambunctious 15-month-old, lots of energy, and it's really hard to get her to just sit down and be calm and actually be engaged by the books that we read. So what's your advice for reading to a 15-month-old?
I have a few different ideas. So one is, I love that you said that you read at bedtime, but you also read at other times too. Because we think something that's really important is ensuring that books aren't just for bedtime, because what's going to happen when that bedtime routine ends? You know, you don't want the books to end too. So I think what sprinkling them throughout the day is really great, and like having as open mind about places that you could have books and entertain yourself with books. Like, you know, you mentioned your child was rambunctious, so maybe you're out at the park playing. Well, when you pause and have a snack, that's a really good time for a book too. You know, when you're at the doctor's office waiting, that's a good time for a book. And actually, speaking of the snacks, I was thinking one thing you can do is during meal times, particularly like lunch or breakfast or something where you might not be having your whole family sitting down and everything, maybe you read a book as they eat. We actually, full disclosure, did not find that reading at the dinner or at mealtime was great for our family, but for maybe the capturing your child there and sort of having a captive audience. And then the last thing I thought of was being sure to find a diversity of books. So when your baby's really young, you know, board books and things are the obvious thing. But, you know, maybe like a single picture and word on a page is just not enough to capture your little one's attention. We actually love the idea of exposing even really young kids to a diversity of different types of books with more and less text.
Yeah, you could also just make sure you've got books out on your child's level, you know, so if your kid's playing around with toys and stuff, next to a bin of toys, you've got a shelf of books, you know, make it so that can just be one of the things that they pick up and interact with whenever they want.
Oh, that reminds me, actually, when our kids were tiny, we had like a box, like a bin of books in the car next to their car seat, so that, you know, it does help it become like just a favorite toy.
I really like that. I never thought about that. Put it in the car, because I have toys, but I don't have books in the car.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure to do that. Yeah, she really likes to run and climb, and she's very active. But I really want her to learn to love to read, to be a book monster one day. So I will definitely work at it. So thank you for that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. We have a question from Amy. Do you have any tips on transitioning from reading together to reading independently? My son likes to read with and to me, but he won't sit down and read on his own.
Well, one thing I would say is to make sure that you always maintain the reading together, you know, even when your child becomes an independent reader. One thing you could do is have family reading time, but you're each reading your own books together. One thing that we've found is that a really good time that our kids like to do quiet reading is after we come home from the library. That's actually one of the library tips we include in the book we thought about talking about today, which is enjoy your quiet afternoon. You know, there's no more motivating time for your child to sit and read than when they have a stack of totally new books.
Yeah, that's good. But I think some of the other things we've already been saying that are going to help too, you know, just having those books accessible and out, you know, so it just make sure that they're not up on a shelf that you're reaching, but, you know, your kid can't go and do it on their own. So I think that's really key.
And perhaps thinking about different kinds of books. Like, I know that for our kids, when they first started reading on their own, ones that were easier were actually ones that were like graphic novels that sort of have like a bite size of text, and they don't have to, you know, take on this whole intimidating full page and chapters of text at a time.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have another question. My little sister, who's 5, gives up very easily when putting together words. I can read to her and have her point with her finger to the words as I read. But as soon as I try to get her to read easy words, she gives up and refuses to continue. I'm struggling to make reading a positive experience. Any ideas? Her brother just turned 4 and is starting to read on his own.
I think that's something that you could really benefit from is those language games that we were talking about. So like one reason that we don't promote like sitting down and doing formal reading lessons together is that they're tedious. And then, like you always say, your child's going to be able to smell a formal lesson coming from a mile away. And then they're just going to be like, nope, my brain is off, right? But by playing these language games, you can really, add some fun to it. So one that I think of, one I'm thinking of right now, for example, is like if you could do it on a piece of paper as you're writing, or like on a whiteboard, or one of those little boards the kids have where it erases when you run the thing across it. But like basically, if you start with a word, like write the word nap, and we talk through what is that word, and then you substitute a letter. I think nap is a bad example, actually. How about pan? That's easier. Okay, so you have the word pan. And then, okay, we know this is pan. We figured it out together. What if we erase that middle letter and make it an I? Now, what is that word? And then we erase that last letter and we change it to a T. What is this word now? We also talk about games that you can play with sight words. Sight words are ones that your child would memorize, so words like said, of, the, these are words that are really frequently occurring as you read, but they don't sound like they're individual parts, like try sounding out said and see what happens. It's a mess, right? So you can play games where one example is like a scavenger hunt, where you write sight words on pieces of like Post-its and spread them around the house. Our kids love scavenger hunt games like this. And then you have a list, and then when they come, their task is to go find a word, come back, stick it to the page where you've written the sight word on your sort of master list. But lots of other examples like that. I would say try to mix up where you're talking about this and how you're doing it. So the examples I gave are like in games, or just like as you're chatting over drawing or writing or something. You can also do it in your everyday conversations. Like from the time our kids were really little, we would play spelling games. Like, they're 2 and 3 and we're playing spelling games. And you're like, how can a 2 and 3-year-old spell? Well, if you have conversations about letters and letter sounds, and you take the opportunity to talk about signs and this and that when you're out and about, then your child is accumulating understanding of the sounds that the letters make. And then you can just have conversations like, hey, how do you think you would spell the word man? And then you're just talking about it. And then the child guesses and you're helping. And then pretty soon they've spelled the word, and you didn't need any workbooks or flashcards or even a book in front of you to do that.
And I've just got 2 more things just to add. Because you talked about, I guess the big brother, I think, is sort of pointing and trying to help, maybe, or somebody's trying to help and point to the words. It might just be that I don't know how long you've been trying to read it in this one sitting, but it might be that you just get some fatigue from the kid. If your kid is doing it and they've read, okay, I've read a few words, I don't want to read any more words. Can you just read it to me? Maybe you just don't need to push so hard, start small and be like, hey, tell me the title of this one, at least make them read the title, or we can't read until you tell me what the book's called, and then you can sort of grow and just add a few more words here and there, another sentence here and there. And then the second thing I'd say is Another thing is maybe just give them a reason to be really motivated to want to be able to read on their own. And one example of that could be, I think you're mentioning 5 years old. So maybe preschool, kindergarten is happening. If you're packing a lunch for the child, include a lunch note. That's something that we have been doing pretty much the whole school careers for our kids. We write these little notes, and they don't have to be complicated. You can do little simple things, but we usually make them funny or silly or just weird. And they now have this thing in the middle of the day. You're not there to read it to them. They're going to want to figure out what these things say.
All right, next question. Now that kids are out of school for summer break, is it true if children don't read during summer break, they come into the school year a grade level behind? How do we make sure our kids keep up with reading during the summer?
I wouldn't go so far as to say a grade level behind. Basically, if you're not building skills over the summer, the objective is to maintain where they left off at the last school year, right? And then they're just ready to go into the is that if your child isn't exposed to sort of educational experiences, whether it be actually reading independently, being read to, just conversation, or things like visiting the museum, their skills can drop over the summer. And that is a real thing. But it's actually really easy to combat as long as you're aware of it. All of these things that we're talking about, so your language games, your talking, your having family dinners where you interact, and family time where you maybe are reading a chapter book and then you're watching the movie. It doesn't have to be that your child reads for a particular amount of time every day, or else they're gonna forget about it, they're gonna lose skills. But just do these things. Make sure you're sprinkling them in every day, every couple days, just making reading and talking a part of your summer. And then you really don't have anything to worry about.
And that's also kind of like one of the big reasons why you want your kids to be book monsters, because, you're helping them along the way at the beginning. But after you get to the point where they actually truly love doing this, they're going to do it on their own, and you're not going to be pulling them along anymore. And so summer comes and they're still going to want to read their own books.
That's a really good point. I think that it's true. Like, if you hear these tips and you're like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, oh my gosh, like to-do list, that's the worst thing you could do. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't think of any single one of these things as a to-do list. If it's stressful for you, it's going to be stressful for your kid, and that's going to be counterproductive. So just really think, out of all the things that we've talked about, what could really enhance your family life? And then start there. And then, just as you said, your child will help with this. It'll just become things that you do because you really enjoy doing it together.
That's great advice. And just to plug our library here a little bit, that's why we have the summer reading program, I think, to help parents continue that reading with their kids during the summer. And we have a lot of fun activities and challenges. We use Beanstack. So the kids earn points for, I think, the amount of books that they read, if they read certain books. So definitely Gwinnett County Public Library is here to help with
Miriam, I wanted to say that actually, because that's one of the most important things to do over the summer. And libraries like yours are so great at just making it fun. Do an outing, and there you go. Your library is going to help right there. I didn't want to overstep though, because I didn't know what exactly you had on offer.
No worries. I'm glad I said something. All right. Another question. Can you explain the 4th grade reading slump?
Yeah, actually, I alluded to it earlier. when I said that pretty soon into elementary school, kids are going to have to read to learn absolutely everything, that actually refers to the 4th grade reading slump, because essentially it is a part of the school curriculum to build reading skills through the end of 3rd grade. And then by the beginning of 4th grade, kids are expected to be good, fluent readers already. And not only that, but at that point, they are expected to use reading to learn all of their different subjects, including math, you know? And so what happens often is that kids who aren't really stellar readers by the end of 3rd grade will drop off. It's a really well-established pattern that lots of kids drop off after the 3rd grade. And that predicts not good things for finishing out the rest of the school. And so all of these things that we've been talking about are important to maintain, not just for those little kiddos who haven't learned to read yet, but also for your older kids, particularly as they go over that period of time and make that transition. So when we say, you know, make sure that you maintain reading together as a family, we mean it because we love it and it's super fun for the whole family, no matter how old you are, but also because your help is never unnecessary. You know, your kids can always benefit from your involvement.
What is your advice for children that live in bilingual households? Is it harder for them to learn words and to learn how to read?
So kids who are learning more than one language have a bigger job. And so early on, like harder to learn words. Well, early on, it takes them a longer time to amass a vocabulary in a single language. So, you know, a child who's learning Spanish and English, compared to the monolingual English speaking child, their English vocabulary is going to be smaller. But if you add their Spanish vocabulary along with it, you see that they're actually going about the same track, you know? So it's harder to learn both languages at first, but the benefits are wonderful. Even as they're young, helping them just with like basic cognitive skills, like rule switching and different things that you do just when you're naturally speaking different languages, and on into adulthood. So there are tremendous reasons to raise a child who's bilingual. And actually our advice is in terms of how you interact with them and read with them in what language. It's that it doesn't matter. Any talking and reading that you do with a child, no matter what language it's in, is going to benefit them in all their languages and in learning to read. It will teach them, no matter what language they're hearing, it teaches them basic language lessons that help them build the skills they need to read.
Sí.
Gracias. What advice do you have for a child who has dyslexia? He loves to read, but has too much difficulty.
So this is something that we don't directly address in our book, actually. So we advise that if you have any concerns about your child's reading at all, to contact your pediatrician and things like that. But I do have a book recommendation for you that you may be able to find at your local library. So it's actually a book that we reference at the end of our book. It's by Marianne Wolf, and it's called Proust and the Squid. She writes about the reading brain, and I believe her son actually has dyslexia. So she has a whole section on that. So I hope that helps.
All right, and we have one more question. What is the next book for you both?
That's such a good question.
To write or to read?
I'll tell you all day about what I'm going to read. No, For writing, we've considered doing a book that's related to book monsters about math, actually, about STEM, because we feel like all of the same sort of things that make you nervous about raising a reader, or the sorts of like hurdles you might run into, you really run into similar things related to math and science. And we think that we could help in terms of like activities related, and just sort of letting parents know, just like with reading, it doesn't have to be so intimidating. But we'll see.
Please write that book, because I'm gonna need it. I'm horrible at math, but I think that would be really useful. Yeah.
All right.
Well, okay. I think that we are coming to an end. Amber and Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. That was a wonderful presentation. Lots of great advice, lots of good methods. Like I said, if you don't have your copy, please get your copy, or go to your local Gwinnett County Public Library branch and pick it up there. But I know I'm definitely going to keep reading this to help me with my 15-month-old. So I really appreciate this book.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yes, and thank you everyone for joining us. This was being recorded, so it will be available on GCPL's YouTube channel. If you could just give us a couple of weeks, it will be on our channel to rewatch. So again, Amber and Andy, thank you so much. We hope to see you again. And again, thank you everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.